All right, now it's 12:35, quarter past.
Okay, quarter past. Well, thanks Year 11, and thanks for coming back promptly. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome to our school Keysar and Sanna, who have never been to Big Quality College before. So if you could just make them welcome. Sanna did HSC exams just last week, so it was very important for us to have another young Australian here to tell us about her faith, and she's off to Lebanon on the weekend, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So it's we're very appreciative that they could give us this time and squeeze us in before the overseas trip. So Keysar and Sanna, Keysar started the Islamic Friendship Association, and you can find it on their web. But today we just wanted to hear about your experience of being Australian Muslims, and we thought we'd ask some questions towards the end. So I'll leave it up to you. Thank you. Thank you, Year 11.
Good morning, everyone. Is it morning or is it afternoon? Afternoon. So I don't better watch, so I can't tell anymore. Before I get my daughter to come up and say a few words, I wanted to ask you some questions. I know you've got some questions prepared for us, so it's only fair if I get you first. What does the word Islam mean? Any takers? Yeah, in the back.
Submission to God.
Submission to God. Is that the only meaning, or is there more meanings? No more meanings? There's two main meanings for the word Islam. One of them is to submit to God, and that term is actually also found in the Bible. The other meaning is to establish peace on earth, to establish peace in your life. Peace with yourself, peace with your peers, peace with the environment, and peace between yourself and God. So it's to be in a state of total peace. They're the two meanings that are captured in the word Islam. And the word Muslim has a further meaning, which implies that the believer has received salvation. So two very simple meanings: peace and submission to God. And one can say that you actually attain peace through living life the way God has advised you to live it, through living in accordance with the will of God. And there's another biblical verse that states that. It says to seek the will of the Father. So you can see some similarities between Christianity and Islam in that sense. Other similarities between Christianity and Islam is that we believe in all the biblical prophets and messengers. We also believe in the virgin birth of Christ. We believe that he was a great man of God, one of the 5 greatest people who ever lived on this earth. We believe that he was a perfect person, and we believe that he served God throughout his life. So these are some of the things that we have in common. The thing that we don't have in common is the final messenger of God. We believe that the final person that God sent to this earth with a message, with a book, was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the difference between us and Christians is the final message. The difference between Christians and Jews, can anyone tell me? What's the difference between Christians and Jews? Very easy. I just gave you a big hint. What's the answer? Well, the Jews don't believe in Christ at all. They think they're still waiting for him to come. But what religion are we told that Christ lived by? What was his religion when he was on earth? So if he was Jew by race and followed the Jewish scriptures, then surely he should have been celebrated by everybody in his local community. And we say, as Muslims, we say everybody at his time should have believed in him. And we believe in him as a great messenger of God. And we say the final one who came after him is the Prophet Muhammad. And that is the difference. Just the difference between Christians and Jews is that they don't believe in Christ. The difference between Muslims and Christians is that Christians don't believe in Muhammad. And probably because you haven't found out enough about him. If you were to read his life, you might find so many similarities between his mission and the mission of Christ and the mission of Moses and the mission of all the great biblical figures. When it comes to ethics and values between Islam and Christianity are very similar. Love your neighbour, be a good Samaritan, be there to help other people when they need your help, be charitable, engage in prayer, engage in fasting, engage in charity. All these things are common to both of us. Respecting your parents, respecting your elders, they're both Christian and Muslim values. So on the values issue, there is hardly any difference. Now, I'll just hand you over a little bit to my daughter and see what she would like to say to you. She's closer to your age. She just finished year 12, and she might have things that are more interesting for you. At the end, we'll take turns for the questions, and I'll answer some and she'll answer some.
Well, you've already heard my name is Sanna, and I just finished my HSC. And well, I'm going to talk to you mainly about being an Australian Muslim. For me, a couple of times when I've done interviews with the media, they've asked me the question, what comes first, being a Muslim or being an Australian? Well, I don't think that you can really compare them because they're two completely different things. I mean, for me, I live the Australian way of life. I go to an Australian school, I've learned English, I was born in an Australian hospital, was a sports fanatic, and some of the stereotypes associated with an Australian I do fit into. So, you know, I very much consider myself an Australian, but I'm an Australian Muslim. So, people ask, is it hard to live the life of a Muslim in Australia? Well, you know, most of my friends are not Muslim, and so I don't find it very hard at all because I consider myself an Australian and a Muslim, and I think that the question shouldn't be asked, is it hard to be an Australian Muslim, because your faith and your culture are two things that are very much different. For me, I did my PIP on Australian identity, and I asked the question, you know, what does it mean to be Australian? What are Australian values? Who do you consider Australian? What is un-Australian? And I basically looked at 3 different suburbs of Bankstown, Cronulla and Newtown, because they were seen as 3 completely different suburbs. And when I asked this question, the main answer was that being Australian is about multiculturalism and giving everyone a fair go. And for me, when I look at my religion, this is something that my religion preaches as well. And, you know, these are the values that that I learned in school, I learned at home. And you know, these are the values that I've carried out throughout my whole life. This is what I've grown up knowing. It's just, you know, it's just not just part of the Australian way of life, it's part of the Muslim way of life as well. And then, you know, you see constantly in the media how the things, can we really live together? You know, can we basically be one society? And, you know, there are certain times when I actually said to myself, I don't think it can work anymore. Comments from politicians, from the media, and I actually just stood back and said to myself, well, you know, for me, my whole life, I thought I was an Australian, and I thought, you know, this is who I am. There was no questions about it. But, you know, recently, I just started questioning it all, and I said to myself, well, am I really an Australian? Am I really accepted here? And it was a really tough question to ask myself, because, you know, my whole life I've said to myself, I'm an Australian. I've convinced myself that, you know, everything that, you know, it's just something the way it is. I was born here, I was raised here, I went to an Australian school, you know, I love Australian sports and everything like that, and just for 1 second I just you know, stood back and said to myself, am I really this anymore? And, you know, for a long time I actually went through this thinking, well, maybe I don't belong here, maybe this is not the place where I'm supposed to be. And then, well, the thing that actually made me realise to myself that I am Australian just like everybody else is actually my mates. My closest friends are all basically have European Anglo-Christian backgrounds. And I actually was saying to my friend, I was just full of so much angst, and I was saying that all this stuff's going on, I don't think that I should stay here anymore, maybe I should go travel or something, get away from it all. And then my friend said to me, like she just simply said to me, you're not going, you're not going to go, I'm not going to let you go, and everything like that. And all of a sudden I realised that, it doesn't matter what everybody else says, because we still have in our community, in the Australian community, these people who maintain these Australian values of giving everybody a fair go and saying, hey, to all the Italians, the Greeks, the Slovaks, all them, you're Australian, and then maybe the contractor from Perth's the alien, There's still this belief that we're all together as Australian, regardless of backgrounds. It's how we see ourselves, and it's the common values that we share. And I had times when that made me doubt, and a lot of times, like when I was younger, when I first started putting on the scarf, I got the weird looks, people made fun of me. And it wasn't just like, I put it on a really young age, I was like 7. And in my school, which was a co-ed school, I had people who were like in year 6 or year 5 who were like, some of them 12 and 11 would actually call me a ghost and just like make fun of me. My sister, her friend's parents said, oh, don't hang out with the girl with a tablecloth on her head. And it was just like, there was these people who were always going to put you in a box and say to you, get out, you terrorist, whatever. But underneath it all, I think that I think with age, everybody starts to understand that, basically we're all the same, and that we all, not all Australians agree. Some people vote Labor, some people vote Liberal. You've got people from all different kinds of religions. Some people don't have a religion. You have, everybody is different, and that's the one thing that's been so great about Australia in recent times is the way that we've all been able to look at each other. Hey, we're all Australian. After everything, I can call you mate, and we can be the closest of friends. And I think that's just when I was doing my pit, asking the question of Australian identity and everything. I'd look back and I'd say, why is it that in the media and we have all these people saying that there's all these differences between us? I think the worst thing we had with the whole September 11 and all these and the anti-terror laws is we had to recognise what a terrorist looked like. And when we started saying, okay, people with dark features look like, we started saying that these people have the appearance of the terrorists, and that basically moved the focus on how we were different. And straight away we had this division between us because we knew that there was something about us that was different. There was something about our values that are different. Hey, maybe these people are preaching a different message. Maybe they don't want to follow our way of life. Well, in the end of the day, I think that you'll find that just go to a sporting match. You'll find people from all these different backgrounds, and they're all standing there cheering for their team. At that moment, it doesn't matter what cultural background you're from. You're all there, and it's either like one team or another. It's not about, who's Leb and who has a Lebanese background. Everyone there is just like a sports fan, just like, it's part of the Australian culture, and they're all following it. If you meet, if you go overseas, and you'll see that Middle Eastern kids here have a lot more in common with the Anglo kids than they do with people overseas. I mean, cultural background at the end of the day also plays such a small part in what somebody's life's going to be. Like for me, I speak a little bit of Arabic, but my first language is English. Maybe it's English slang more because... And, I've just taken on so much, I've lived here my whole life. It's not about taking on so much of the Australian culture. It's about being Australian and just, that's your way of life basically, as well as being a Muslim and having a Lebanese background. I mean, and the thing is, I've just finished school and I was school captain of my school and everything. It was a co-ed school. It wasn't, and I remember the week after the Cronulla riots, we had our presentation day. And we had a little bit of division in the school, mainly amongst some of the younger kids of ethnic background who were pretty upset. And they did the wrong thing. They went and basically started picking on some Anglo kids. And the Anglo kid who they were picking on was one of my best friends. And so when it came to giving my speech in front of the whole school, I was saying to them how, the thing about what we can do as people to show, as people from Bankstown, as people who live every single day with our different cultures, is basically look at each other and still be able to say to each other, hey mate, things that happen, the thing is, bad things are going to happen all the time. You're going to have race riots, you're going to have people who can't get along, but the thing the thing that made Australia so great, the thing that made people think, hey, you know, Australians are the most friendly people on earth, is the fact that they look at Australia and they'll go, you know, you've got all these race riots in France and Great Britain and all these other places, and then you've got Sydney, which is statistically the most multicultural place on earth, and there hadn't been a history on this. And I think that, you know, that's something that we can take pride in. And then we have this little, you know, this situation. We had this situation, and we basically tried to deal with it straight away. And in a way, we could have, from such an ugly situation where you had like, I don't know, a couple of thousand people acting like idiots basically, saying, you know, get out of a country, lots of comments that I will not repeat. And then the next week you had a peace protest which had even more people, which more than doubled the people who'd gone, you know, to do the wrong thing on the beach. And I think that, you know, for me, after all this personal reflection, when I started to think about it, this is the Australia that I knew, and this is Australia that I called home, this is Australia that I grew to love. And after all, you know, this is a place, at the end of the day, if I ever become a politician or anything, it's this country that I want to represent, and it's this country that I want to help become an even better place than it already is. So, you know, growing up as a Muslim, sure, I had, like, there were a lot of things that made me different. Like, even when I went to school, I'd spend my lunchtimes praying. But as soon as I finished praying, I'd still carry myself in a Muslim way, because I dress in the, you know, the scarf and everything. But when I went out there, I went to hang out with my mates, talk about sport, talk about, you know, all that stuff that basically most Australian people do. So, you know, I had my religion there, and my faith is so important to me, and I'm always going to hold on to that. But, you know, it works, you know, even in an Australian setting, and even following most of the Australian way of life, apart from the drinking, you know, we don't drink, and which is not really an Australian way of life as much as it's a culture thing. But, you know, about that, the only thing we don't do like the rest of Australia is drink and gamble, that's about it. And then everything else, we can just, every single day, go out there and be Australian, you know. And, you know, hang out with your mates that are, you know, all the same. Like, we're all, like, that's the thing at the end of the day, it's knowing that you are Australian. And I think that the problems we have when you have, you know, you have people who are culturally confused, you don't know whether they're Australian anymore. And at the end of the day, it's not about just them going out there and saying they're Australian. It's about everybody else being able to accept, you know, being able to accept everybody, every single different background that's being Australian, no matter what their religious, no matter what religion they follow. You know, it's about all of us being able to look at each other and say, hey, you know, at the end of the day, I'm Australian, you're Australian, and we're not gonna give in to these media. We're not gonna let the media divide us. We're not gonna let politics divide us. But we're all gonna live together in this country that is so great and is so beautiful, and help make this a better place.
Thanks, Sanna and Keysar. I'll just invite Shelley and Patrick, who we've just gathered your questions from your RE classes the other day, and on your behalf they're going to ask them of Keysar and Sanna. Thank you.
Do you think that the Muslim society is inaccurately stereotyped by Australian society?
I think that you'll find that most stereotypes are incorrect. It's not just a matter of the stereotypes on Muslims or all stereotypes. When you try and put someone in a box and say that they're all the same, then you're putting an accurate stereotype on them. I mean, for me, I'm not the stereotype of what people think is a Muslim woman, and like I've come to realise that through what various politicians have said about Muslim women who wear the scarf. I'm nowhere near, I'm not even a stereotype of someone with a Lebanese background. I mean, I come from Bankstown, I support the Roosters, and, you know, most people look at that as weird. And then, you know, I'm an extrovert as well, so, you know, I don't think, you know, that's just a stereotype of Muslim women, and there's a stereotype of male Muslims as well, that, you know, they treat women, they think that Anglo chicks are bad, and, like, you know, all that stuff. And you find that this is a very inaccurate stereotype. And, you know, a lot of the stereotypes that they get are inaccurate. You will actually find that there are very few people, I doubt you can find a single person who will fit the exact stereotype of anything. So most of the, by far a majority of the stereotypes are completely inaccurate about the Muslim community, and it's unfair to stereotype anyone at the end of the day, or any community.
That's definitely worth a clap. It's unfair to stereotype anyone, anywhere. Thank you. That's worth a clap, guys.
Do extremists misinterpret the Quran for their own purposes, or does the Quran actually support extremists?
All this, well, my daughter was just talking about how stereotypes don't fit, and this whole idea of what's an extremist, what do we begin to understand as an extremist in Australian society? Is it just somebody who has a different interpretation, or a radical interpretation of something, or is it somebody who's involved in an act of violence somewhere else? Are we talking about those people who engage in acts of terror? Those people who engage in acts of terror, we've been saying from the very first day that they are not acting in accordance with the religious teachings. In fact, their behaviour is a total aberration. They are not interpreting the Quran. Their behaviour is totally unacceptable as far as religion is concerned. Nobody has the right to hurt innocent people. If your country is under invasion and there are soldiers shooting at you, that's a different story. And that's a universal right for people to defend their country against invasion. There's a difference between being invaded and fighting against soldiers who are holding a gun, and between hurting civilians. Hurting civilians like September 11 or Bali or London or Madrid, all these acts of terror are completely condemned in the very strongest terms in the religion of Islam. There's no room for it whatsoever. Those people who decide to take a fundamentalist or an extreme approach to the religion, I think if we want to be fair to them, we have to look at exactly what they're doing. Is it that they are living a monastic, difficult type of life, that they're imposing extra rules on themselves? If they are imposing extra rules on themselves and they're not interfering with me or with the rest of us, that's their choice. People can live a strict life if they wish. They're only depriving themselves. They're not depriving the rest of us. So people in that category that go to extremes, sometimes it just may be an extreme of devotion to God. Sometimes it's an extreme of taking extra burdens for themselves. And sometimes it's an extreme where they start to expect others to do something different. If they start to expect others to live an extreme life, then that's unacceptable. There is no support for that in the religion of Islam. There is one verse in the Quran that criticises people who go to extremes in religion. And it just uses those terms. It says, do not go to extremes in your religion. And there's a statement from the Prophet Muhammad where he said, do not go to extremes in your religion. Anybody that takes his religion to an extreme will end up defeating himself. Because life is not meant to be about extremes of anything.
How has the Australian Islamic community affected after September 11th and the Cronulla riots?
I covered this a bit in my earlier speech, like the whole idea of us having to recognise what a terrorist looks like. And, well, you know, the thing is, I think in the 90s and in the 80s and the 70s we moved forward a lot in terms of being able to accept one another of different backgrounds. And I think when we had the tragedy of September 11 happen, you know, it was like the first time when it was actually an attack on, you know, a massive attack on white, like what we saw as us basically, the white Anglo-European Christian people who have now become known as them, you know, where you had like the people from the Middle East and stuff like that, and I think that caused an instant division. But, you know, it's been affected in a way because all of a sudden, you know, you saw how everyone's talking about the Middle East again, and, you know, and you had like all over the media whenever a crime was committed by someone of Middle Eastern background, their ethnic background was highlighted, which was completely unnecessary at the end of the day. So it hasn't just affected the Muslim community, it's affected the whole Middle Eastern community as well. And the effects have been quite negative because they've been positive as well, but they've been quite negative in a way that it brings about this division, but they've been positive as well because it highlighted a problem that we have. Like, it showed us that we might not, that there is an issue of race still, and that we have not obliterated it like we once thought we did. So it gave us the means for trying to fix that problem that we still kind of had.
Why has Sheikh al-Khalay not been removed from his position of authority in the Muslim community?
Before I answer that, I wanted to add something to what my daughter said. As people, we can all be pushed in a corner and start to react on the basis of fear. And sometimes that fear is manifested in racism, sometimes it's manifested in a number of different things. What we've got to make sure is in every situation that we face is never to lose our cool. Never lose your temper, and don't allow people to frighten you. If you keep a calm head, then you can evaluate the situation and you can find a rational solution. But if you're frightened, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to find a rational solution to any situation. So it's very important that when you find somebody's playing on your fears, trying to make you afraid of another person, it's very important to actually analyse it for yourself. Is it fair for me to be afraid? What are the reasons? And am I moving into the area of racism? Racism can be brought out of every person. And every person is able to deal with it and to stop it from coming to the surface. And letting other feelings of positive, that are positive, that are embracing of other people, that are friendly and respectful, to actually come to the fore instead of feelings of racism. On the issue of the Mufti, what does anybody here know what the substance of the Mufti's message was? Just lift your hand up and say to me, what do you think the Mufti was saying? Yes?
That women need to cover up, or they could be raped.
Okay. Is that all, or is there some other things? Is that the most offensive part that you had, or is there... Yes?
The reference to Australian women as meat for dogs.
Okay. So, any more? No more? Okay. Now, the Mufti was giving a late night talk to a group of parents, all of whom were from Arabic background. Those who were not from Arabic background would not have understood a word he said, because he was speaking only in Arabic. There were men and women in the audience. And it was late at night after the extra prayers that we do in the month of Ramadan. The young people had walked out because they can't be bothered listening to a talk in Arabic, and they were fraternising outside. I doubt that there would have been anybody in there under the age of 30. And he was giving these people ideas about the importance of modesty and abstinence. You know what the word abstinence means? Yeah? Okay. In his example, most of you have been to a church, yes? Yes? And you've sat on a church service. Sometimes you have priests that use fire and brimstone sermons, yes? You know what I mean by fire and brimstone sermon? Yes? Yeah, the scary ones, the scary sermons. The sermons that put the fear of God into you. You've heard some of those before? And sometimes they use sermons that only put the love of God into your heart. When it comes to teaching people about morals, sometimes you put the fear of God into their heart, sometimes you put the love of God into their heart. They are the two tools of any religious cleric, of any priest. Love and fear. Am I right or am I wrong? If anybody thinks I'm wrong, put your hand up. Am I? You've all experienced that. He was telling parents, he was putting the fear of God into the hearts of these parents, that encourage your children to be modest, encourage your children not to have any sex outside of marriage. He wasn't just talking about adultery, it was total abstinence. Nothing outside of marriage. Keep yourself until you are married. Boys and girls. Not just girls, boys and girls. And modesty for both boys and girls. And then he quoted a writer. And by quoting the writer, he didn't quote another imam or another member of the clergy. He quoted a writer to illustrate that there are some extreme views out there. The extreme view here was that this writer was saying if he was a judge in a court, he would basically do what most of the judges today
through very sophisticated means